The year 2025 started out on the right foot with personal best in a 5K on New Year's Day. And from that point forward, I had the whole year totally mapped out. There would be some medium distance races of the 10K and half marathon varieties while I trained for my next big marathon, Boston, in April. And then that would be followed by an extended training block meant to push me towards a marathon PB on the flat and fast course in Chicago on October 12th. But plans are just plans, and sometimes it's important to stick to a plan, then other times the plan needs to be adjusted. And without even getting through the month of January, a real monkey got thrown into my proverbial 2025 wrench. The Chicago race was basically set in stone, with the race fee, my hotel, and my flights all booked and paid for. And even if none of that was true, my heart was set on running that marathon. It was happening. So, what on earth could mess up this plan? I'll tell you what, an email. Let me explain. In the last week of January, after wrapping up the week 6 Sunday long run for my Boston training cycle, I came home to clean up, refuel, and wind down. Standard Sunday routine. As I put my feet up and perused my email, almost all of which is junk mail, I landed on one from Abbott World Marathon Majors. Glancing at it, I assumed it was just going to be some marketing fluff. But to my surprise, it was something much different. It was an invitation to participate in the 2025 Age Group World Championships. What? My first reaction was that it must be a hoax, because I knew my current PB wasn't within the qualifying standard. However, after double and triple checking the email domain, it looked to be authentic, and I realized it was the real deal. But how? Well, it turns out the qualifying standard for the age group is more specifically the time by which one will automatically qualify. But not everyone that automatically qualifies accepts their invitations. That leaves open spots that they can then offer to folks in the next tier, folks like me. I suppose you can think of it as getting called up from the B team or winning a spot by default or being an alternate. But whatever you want to call it, it was still a spot in the race, and it was a big deal to me. In other sports, if a minor team player gets called up to the majors, are they not playing in a major league game? Yes, they are. And this was an opportunity to race in the world championships of the sport I love the most. I couldn't pass that up, could I? So, what's the problem, you might ask? Timing. The Age Group World Championships are sort of a race within a race, and were being run this year as part of the New York City Marathon on November 2nd, only 3 weeks after the Chicago Marathon, which was booked and paid for and happening no matter what. I stewed on it for a couple of hours, somehow convinced that there was a choice to make here. And I suppose there was, but it wasn't the choice I initially thought I had to make. Accept the invitation or decline. No, that wasn't the choice at all. I eventually realized that seizing this opportunity was the only option, and the real choice was which marathon is my primary goal race, Chicago or New York? Okay, that was enough information to take the next step. First, I phoned my mom to give her the news. As my biggest supporter, she was absolutely delighted, and I loved sharing it with her before anyone else. After hanging up with her, I then researched my flights and hotel accommodation, and as if to prevent myself from backing out, booked and paid in full immediately. Finally, I went back to the unbelievable email and officially accepted and paid for my race entry. No turning back now. However, the question remained about which should be my primary race. If Chicago was to be the primary, then I would be going full send in that race and then muster up whatever I had left in New York City after a 3 week recovery. If the World Championships were to be the primary, then Chicago would be treated like a final long run in my training plan, and then full send in New York City. Now, it might seem obvious that the World Championship should be the primary goal, but there are other factors at play. One of those factors is the course profile in each race. Chicago is considered flat and fast with very little elevation change and is where the current world records were set for both men and women. New York, on the other hand, is arguably the most difficult of the world marathon majors, with massive bridges to be summited as you navigate through the five boroughs of New York City. I also had to contemplate my own position within the field and my prospects of running a fast time against that field. Realistically, as a competitor in the World Championships, I had no chance of being close to the leaders who would be running 30 to 40 minutes or even more faster than me. So, does it really matter if I finish 30 minutes behind the winner or 40 minutes or an hour? In addition, logically, I felt that the possibility of running a PB, or at least close to it, in Chicago might give me a chance at a future World Championships invitation, whereas a PB in New York City was much less likely, regardless of my preparation. And if I do ever get a second invitation, I can then plan ahead for it and not have another race booked immediately beforehand. Finally, one last data point to ponder upon was my propensity to run with blinders on when I'm racing hard. I tend to focus so hard on the task of racing that I tune out my surroundings and I fail to appreciate the sights and sounds, which can often be spectacular, yet go completely unnoticed by me. And from everything I'd heard, New York would be offering a great deal of breathtaking scenes that I wouldn't want to miss with my blinders on. So there you have it. Decision made. Full send in Chicago for a fast time and run New York just for fun and full appreciation. Now, at this point, I'm still more than 8 months out from this double-header race plan with a bunch of other races and a whole lot of training in between. All of which has been captured in my vlog and my race videos, so I won't rehash it here. Suffice it to say, though, it was far from perfect. But as I explained in my Chicago NYC 2025, The Pursuit of Imperfection video, sometimes perfection is not what it seems. My recovery from Chicago went better than expected. I had precisely 3 weeks, and unsurprisingly, the first week of that was dominated by DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. By the following weekend, the legs felt good, but a general whole body fatigue stuck with me for most of the second week. Then, just 1 week out from New York, I felt great. I was sleeping well, and my energy levels appeared to have fully recovered. A remarkable turnaround that got me thinking, was another full send possible? No. Stick to the plan. Have fun and capture some stunning video footage. Right? Besides, I had bigger fish to fry at that moment. I had to get through a wickedly busy partial week of work, then get myself to New York, do the expo, get my carb load done, plus all the other various pre race preparations. There was no time to think about switching up my race day strategy. My flight to New York was scheduled to arrive mid afternoon on Thursday, a 3-ish hour ride from Dallas, allowing enough time to make it to the expo that evening and beat the humongous Friday crowds. The flight, from my perspective with my headphones on, listening to relaxing music, was smooth and uneventful, and I was amazed when I realized we were about to land quite a bit earlier than expected. But a knot instantly formed in my belly when we descended underneath the clouds, and instead of a sea of buildings below, an expanse of brilliant fall foliage stretched out beneath us like a giant and unexpected Jackson Pollock painting. Either this wasn't New York, or the pilot had tragically miscalculated our approach into LaGuardia Airport. I removed my headphones, and the knot in my stomach nearly made a hasty exit from my mouth when I heard the pilot announce, "Welcome to Pittsburgh." My first thought was completely irrational. How did I get on the wrong effing plane? Then, as if to read my insane mind, the pilot explained that we would wait there for the storm to pass to New York so they could clear the ground stop. Okay, not a disaster, just a delay. Initially, we weren't even going to plane, but that changed. Then a 30-minute wait in the terminal became an hour, then became 2 hours, and finally, 3.5 hours later, we reboarded and headed towards New York. Now, you'll notice I said towards New York and not to New York. We got within 100 miles, but meandered in a holding pattern for over an hour until a somewhat dejected pilot's voice came over the intercom with bad news. We still couldn't land, and we were headed back to Pittsburgh. There was that nod again, because I realized there was about to be yet another announcement with more bad news. I knew the crew had been flying all day, and when we landed in Pittsburgh, by law, they would have to be done. We would need a new crew. A new crew that would somehow need to be found at 9 p.m. What I didn't anticipate was that there is even more unwelcome news coming. As the pilot explained the situation and that it was unlikely we would find a crew, so hotel rooms were being reserved, he added one more nasty little nugget. Because of how busy the airport was in New York, with a mass of delayed flights, it was also quite improbable that we would be able to get a slot to land the following day. Now, this is where I would normally expect to complain about the airline and their poor handling of the problem. But I must say, the gate agents in Pittsburgh made a heroic effort to resolve the situation. Even though the hotels were already reserved, they requested that we wait at the gate while they attempted to cobble together an impossible crew. So we waited and waited and waited some more. And it took 3 hours, but against all odds, they actually pulled it off. They somehow convinced flight attendants and a co pilot and a captain from multiple different incoming flights to work one extra shift and take us up to LaGuardia. Hallelujah. We were back in business. It was nearly 3 a.m. when we arrived, but to the amazement of every soul on that plane, they got us there. The sleep plan for the first night was thrown out the window, but I was where I needed to be, and that was all that mattered. I snagged only a few hours of shut eye, in an attempt to get up early enough to beat the crowds to the expo. Sadly, that was a complete failure, as apparently many thousands of other people had the exact same idea. But, as I had done the night before, I shrugged it off as another uncontrollable. It wasn't worth stressing out about because the stress could do nothing to help the situation, but could do so much to hinder my race performance if I let it get to me. So I grabbed my race bib and shirt, fought my way through the hordes of people ravaging the marathon merch, and escaped without making a single purchase, all the while shedding stress with every step that I took. Next up, get going with the carb load. Without getting into too much detail, I will just say that a 2 day carb load for my body weight requires approximately 900 grams of carbs per day. That is a lot. However, a hack that works for me is to use orange juice for liquid carbs, prevent getting super bloated from tubs full of pasta, rice, and potatoes. So I guzzled 4 liters of OJ each day to get half of my allotment in as liquids, and then a much more reasonable amount of solid food to get to the 900 grams for the day. That's probably not for everyone, but I've done it before and I knew that it would work for me. So, with 1 day of the carb load complete, the plan for Friday night was to turn in early to make up for the rough night before. Unfortunately, it was also Halloween, and the adult trick or treaters in the New York City area had other plans. People laughing and screaming in the streets and in the hotel hallways, hot rods racing, police sirens, fire trucks, and even a gunshot all contributed as makeshift alarm clocks throughout the night. I was tired enough to get back to sleep each time, but the constant interruptions were far from ideal. Fortunately, on Saturday, I had very little on the schedule outside of feeding my run and step streaks, plus finishing the carb load. I was back in my room with my feet up by mid-afternoon, and by 6:30 p.m., I could barely keep my eyes open. So I decided I should turn in early. And I mean very early. At 6:45, I was dead to the world, even though I knew there was a risk I would also then wake up much too early, which is exactly what happened. But my calculus was that as long as I got a solid sleep beforehand, it would be fine. I could just use the extra time for pre-race preparations. So that's exactly what I did. I felt strangely good the morning of the marathon. I was ready early, and despite my lackluster sleep over several nights, the excitement and adrenaline had my energy levels running high. So high, in fact, that the time seemed ripe for a game day decision. After all, this was the New York City Marathon and the Age Group World Championships for crying out loud. Feeling this good physically and then phoning it in with an easy run was not going to fly. New plan: race hard and find out what I'm made of. Go time. They had me on the 5 a.m. Midtown bus, which got me to the start area on Staten Island by 5:45. It seemed like it would be a long time to wait for my 9:15 start time, but the time passed shockingly fast. I stayed relatively comfortable by bringing and sacrificing my airplane neck pillow to sit on instead of the hard ground. I had to eat my second breakfast 3 hours before running, so that kept me busy for a while. Then I joined Ben and Mary's coaching live stream at 7 a.m. for an hour, and that also passed quickly. A couple of toilet stops, and before I knew it, they were calling us to the start corral. Easy peasy. Of course, it helped that one of the fringe benefits of participating in the championships was that they put us all together in Corral C in Wave 1, regardless of the pace we would run. That basically meant we got to start very early compared to the masses. It was certainly a special privilege and made a huge difference. We all shuffled onto the Verrazano Narrows Bridge together in time to see the elite men's field start on the other side of the bridge. It is such a cool feeling to know you are sharing the same course with these superstars in the same race. There's no other sport where you can do that. Today, I would be running a race at the same time as the GOAT, Eliud Kipchoge, who was in that field of elite men. That's mind blowing. A short time after they fired the cannon to start the elites, Corral C got our own cannon blast, which was so loud and so awesome. And away we went. It was an immediate uphill battle for nearly a mile to get to the top of that bridge. All the while, what seemed like a squadron of news helicopters swarmed above and around the bridge. I saw gargantuan ships in the water below and a helicopter flying right beside me as I ascended up this enormous structure. And on the other side of the helicopter, the New York City skyline. It was surreal. That initial climb was a tough way to start. But you are still totally fresh, and although it's jarring to get your heart rate and breathing up that early, you know you can claw back some rest and some time going down the other side. And I did. In fact, by the time I reached the 5K marker, my split was 24:03, which was faster than Chicago and near a PB pace. I still felt very good, which is quite normal that early in the race, but nonetheless, I took it as a good sign. I reached the 10K marker at 47:56, a second 5K split of 23:53. Again, faster than Chicago, and feeling perfect. It's far too early to feel confident about a result, but I am certainly happy with the way I feel. At 15K, my time is 1:12:13, which makes that split 24:17, a minor slowdown. But I get slightly dyslexic and I read my watch as 1:21:13, which confuses me for a minute until I realize I must have read it wrong. But by then, the watch has ticked over, and I assume it must have said 1:11:13, and wrongly decide I had sped up even more. It's all very confusing. But the reality is that I'm still ahead of my Chicago pace. Next is 20K, where I arrive at 1:36:21, a split of 24:08. Very consistent. And again, better than Chicago. But the difference, in hindsight, is that in Chicago, I had been speeding up incrementally in each 5K block. In real time, I'm not exactly aware of all the numbers to compare, but I know I'm close or faster and would know for sure when I hit the halfway marker. I knew my first half 3 weeks ago was 1:42:01, and this time I crossed it at 1:41:39, so I had 22 seconds in the bank and still felt strong. Unfortunately, that 22 seconds in the bank was about to get spent, and then some. You cross the half marker on an uphill climb on one of the mini bridges, which feels somehow wrong to be punishing you while you cross the half. But you get past it, and you tell yourself that it was tolerable, and you can get back on track. What you don't realize is that there's a monster waiting for you, and that monster has a name. That monster is named the Queensboro Bridge. We've all heard tales of trolls that live under a bridge. Well, this bridge is the troll. It punches you in the gut, kicks you in the crotch, and then rips off your head and spits down your neck. I hit the 25K marker on that bridge at 2:01:05, now 43 seconds behind Chicago, and more than a minute slower than the previous 5K split. I don't fully realize it yet, but the PB attempt is history, and beating Chicago has begun to slip away. At the 30K marker, I pick up a few seconds and cross at 2:25:05, a 24-minute split, and precisely 1 minute behind Chicago. But I struggle to do the math this late in the race, so I'm unsure of how far off I might be. That said, I am not really counting on beating Chicago, and I'm also not the least bit concerned about it. My time is 2:49:43 at the 35K marker, and the math becomes more manageable to calculate back from potential finish times. Now I definitely realize that I'm behind the pace, but I'm 100% satisfied with where I am. I'm having fun, I'm still feeling good, and I feel confident I can have a strong finish. Crossed the 40K at 3:15:02. Still hopeful for a sub 325. However, I am underestimating the impact of the undulating terrain in Central Park for the final 2.2K. I do pick up the pace and finish strong as planned, but I come in with a 3:25:56. A positive split for the race, but a smile on my face. And while that was certainly short of my updated time target from the start of the race, I was so proud of what I had just done. I came into the race on only 3 weeks rest from a super hard effort in Chicago onto a highly technical and extremely challenging course, following several exceedingly dubious nights of sleep that were preceded by an insanely stressful 24-hour travel day. And after all that, I was still only 3 minutes slower than what I ran in the Windy City. I may not have achieved the time objective, but I nailed the effort objective, and I blew the fun objective out of the water. Sometimes it's wise to be cautious. However, this was not one of those times. It just felt right, so I seized the opportunity. I seized the day. I seized the run. And I seized the right to make up my own Latin phrase in summary. Carpe Runem.